Hey everyone! As I promised, for today's video, I'm going to talk about some books I used to own. At the end of the 2010s, I had something like 1,100 CGC graded books spread out over my house in external storage. The collection ranged from the 40s through to the present day and included Golden Age DCs, tons of random pedigree books from the Golden Age and Silver Age, long runs of Marvel titles from the Silver Age up to moderns, and some oddball stuff like the most complete Wildstorm CGC collection ever put together, or so I think. The heart of the collection, however, was one of the top CGC graded Daredevil collections out there. I had 1 to 191 and 94 or better, and then just two 92 exceptions. You'll never guess what the second one is. And then strong runs from 192 to 283 and volume 2, 1 to 91. I was missing just a handful of issues to have complete graded ones from 1 to 283, and then volume 2, 1 to 91. Here's what I wrote on the blog when I went to sell. After many years of putting together a high-grade, CGC-graded Daredevil collection, I've decided to sell almost the whole thing this year. Check out the set, and then I pointed people to the CGC registry, and it, go over some of the things I just talked about. Then I went on to say, it was a lot of fun to put together. In the process of breaking the collection up, it's going to be fun to share it with everyone one last time. Which is funny because here I am 5 years later sharing it again. Anyway, the Silver and Bronze Age books are going to be sold in the next Comic Connect auction. This was in 2019. The scans aren't up on the site yet, but they will be soon, and they'll be open for bidding soon enough. Blah, blah, blah. And then I said, it's going to be exciting. I drove the books down to Comic Connect a couple of weeks ago. I'd never been to their offices before, so it was great to take in the incredible art and movie posters on the walls and to see the Metropolis Comic Connect operation behind the scenes. And just as an aside, not in the blog post, it really is a lot of fun to go down there. It's like a comic art museum and poster museum and just like all this paper ephemera all over the place. It's just crazy. And then in the middle of all of that, there's a business going on, right? They're one of the biggest comic auction houses in the world. They still sell a bunch of books mail order. And so it's like there's a comic business going on and there's a comic museum on the walls. It's really pretty crazy. But let's go on. So, why? This has been building for a while. Here are some reasons. I'm bored with putting together long runs. I've been doing it as a collecting focus for a while, and while I definitely enjoyed the challenge for many years, it's lost its appeal. So at this point, I simply don't have the energy to finish the Daredevil Volume 1 and 2 runs. I'm just a couple of dozen books shy of having a solid run from 1 to 284 and then all of Volume 2 to the end of the Bendis run. The thing is, and trust me on this since I've done it multiple times with different runs from different eras, finishing off those runs might take 2 or 3 years. No one sells those books. No one grades those books. It would be down to me to source and grade them. I don't have any interest in doing that, so I feel less need to keep the run together in the hopes of finishing off the most epic version possible. And as an aside, one of the reasons that I didn't want to finish grading those 80s, 90s, and 2000s books is because CGC's turnaround times for moderns was extremely slow at that point. It may have been a year. It was a long time. So think about it. You're like, I have a hole. I need Daredevil 267 in CGC 98. You find one for $1 or $2 and in a bin somewhere. You buy it. You send it off to get graded, and if it doesn't come back as a 9.8, you've lost a year of calendar time trying to fill this hole, so it can take years. Multiple tries. One of the things that did happen is that I would grade Fantastic Four 283 as an example. I think I sent 6 off to be graded over 18 months and ended up with a couple of 9.8s and some 9.6s and whatever. But I was just hedging my bets because I couldn't wait to find out, after a year, whether or not the Fantastic Four 283 I sent off was actually a 9.8. Long digression, but it was a thing. But back to the post. I finished the run I really wanted, 1 to 157, mostly 9.4 with 55 pedigree books, many of which we'll see soon, a couple of years ago. It's an awesome run, but it's done, and I don't get as much pleasure out of the books just sitting there as I did chasing them. That's the way it goes, and you hear that from people all the time. Daredevil aside, at some point near the end of last year, I had over 1,100 CGC graded books. I've still got a storage space full of comics and have plenty of comics in my office at home. I have so many books that, despite my best efforts, I can't even really keep track of what I have. I'm currently missing the Pacific Coast copy of Fantastic Four 97 for one current example. I'm tired of having that many books, and I want to get my collection down to something more manageable. And then I go on to, list the books that I was going to keep, and I ended up selling many of them over the years. But, it was the beginning of just kind of like getting rid of all of this stuff. Having that many CGC books is crazy. It's fun, but it's also crazy. I wanted to say, I was never going to be Doug or Tom Berlato with multiple high-grade runs of all the Marvel titles, as much as I would like to have been. I might go ahead and do a short run of Tales of Suspense or Fantastic Four or Avengers, which I haven't done yet, but I still might, again, because I'm kind of really getting excited about comics again in a way that I haven't been in a while. That's why I'm here. But like I said, at the time, I'm not spending another 10 years chasing these books at this point in my life. And that's true now, too. I'm not going to spend 10 years trying to put together a long, crazy run. Something shorter, sweeter, more fun might be the way to go. Realizing that was liberating. At the time, I thought, I can collect random books without a plan if I so chose. One great example was a Superman 14 I bought at that time, which I mentioned here. It was restored, but beautiful. And finally, so just to finish off the quote, I said, I think the Comic Connect auction will be fun. I'll have a catalog as a record of the run, and I have a paper catalog. I should dig it up. I'll dig it up and put it in a short. And I'll get to shamelessly pimp my collection for a few weeks, which I did. And then when it's all over, I'll get a nice check. Pretty sweet, if you ask me. That ends the quote, which of course had a bunch of editorializing, but what are you going to do? It's me. And just to follow up, and it was fun. I got a couple of nice checks. It was a great experience, and unsolicited plug, I would recommend Comic Connect if you're thinking about selling your books. Now, full disclosure, I've had good experiences selling with Heritage, including categories outside of comics, Comic Link, and Pedigree as well. So, I find that there are kind of horses for courses, and it depends on the material you have. So some books and collections just make more sense at different venues. So, but with all of that background out of the way, and that's a lot of background, let's take a look at some of the books I sold. I'm going to focus on some keys, some favorites, and a subset of the Pedigree books, because, like I said, there are 55, so we'd be here all day if I just, pointed out them all. So if you're sticking with me this far, I hope you like beautiful Silver Age Marvels, because we're going to take a look at a lot of them. Let's get started with Daredevil number 1, CGC 9.4. This copy was basically a perfect 9.4 number 1. It's well-centered, very white, with great overall preservation. One of the things that you see with Daredevil number 1 is when it was put together, it was not well-centered, the number box is off the page or an inch to the left or whatever. It just was a mess in terms of quality of production. This one has great quality of production. So, when this book came up for auction, I had been trying to buy a copy in 9.4 or better for a while. As you do, it takes a while to get, your key book. And I had failed to pull the trigger on a relatively cheap 9.6, kind of within the previous 18 months. I wimped out because it was over my budget, and I was trying to be responsible. And I was aiming for a 9.4, and so my budget didn't include a 9.6, even a cheap one. The thing is, I almost immediately regretted not taking the leap. When this copy came up for sale, I made sure to get it because I was never going to find a better 9.4, and I was still stinging from not getting that 9.6. You live, you learn. Let's take a look at this. Daredevil number 2, CGC 9.4. When I sold it, this book went into an extensive bidding war for maybe 15 minutes. That was the one time I felt during the Comic Connect experience that it would have been cool and more fun to have had books at a live auction, i.e. Heritage. Watching an auctioneer would have been fun with this crazy bidding war, going back and forth for 15 minutes. I ended up getting something like 2.5 times what I paid for it, and it was a record at the time that didn't get broken for another kind of 3 or 4 years, including what was a very hot period for comics. I felt like it deserved it. It's a beautiful, well-preserved copy. Skipping through, Daredevil 3, Daredevil 4, Mr. Purple Man, there we go. Daredevil number 5, CGC 9.4. This is a beautiful copy of this book. The first Wally Wood is a cool semi-key in the run since he had such a visual impact on the title, but more importantly for me is I've always loved this cover. The gradient in the background and the details on the cover really make it a classic in my mind, and this copy really popped. The scan doesn't actually do it justice. It was much richer and brighter than the scan shows. There we go. Daredevil number 7, CGC 9.2. This book is a pain in the butt to buy in high grade. It is known. How tough? There have been 3 sales in 9.6, 9 total sales in 9.4, and 25 total sales in 9.2 in GPA in the CGC era. When I was buying these books, there were 2 sales in 9.4 over a period of 14 years between 2004 and 2018. Imagine waiting 14 years for a single copy of a book you're interested in to come up for auction at your target grade. I ended up buying what I felt like was a great option in 9.2 with the idea of maybe someday upgrading with another copy, but I never did. Ridiculously, there have been 4 9.4 sales since I sold my books. So if I'd held on, I would have had more opportunities in just a couple of years over 2021 and 2022 than I'd had in the previous 18 years to buy a copy in 9.4. How many times in a row, how many videos in a row can I mention the Boston pedigree? All of them so far. This is a sharp book. Boston books are great in the years that they contain. So Daredevil 17. So this is an incredibly rich copy. I love the pair. I love 16 and 17 because of the importance to the history of Marvel. Hey, this Romita guy might be good on Spider-Man. But as individual books, 17 is by far my favorite of the 2. I love the Spidey symbol on the cover, like the Daredevil dynamic kicking the dude in the face. And this particular copy was beautiful. The richness of the colors on this particular copy made it a real favorite from my run. There we go. Daredevil 19, CGC 9.6 mass copy. This is an outstanding book. The mass pedigree doesn't end up in many people's radars for like a top Silver Age pedigree, but this particular copy is really pretty crazy. So, super fan. And unlike mass, this particular pedigree does come up. So Daredevil number 22, CGC 9.6 Pacific Coast copy. The Pacific Coast is always in the top 2 or 3 when conversations about the best Silver Age pedigrees of all time come up. For my money, it's behind only White Mountain. I know other people would swap that or drop White Mountain even further down the pecking order since it predates the CG era, by a good number of years and came out in tranches over decades. People don't necessarily know like how deep it is and how high the quality is. But no one is going to argue that Pacific Coast isn't a top Silver Age pedigree. And this yellow cover 9.6 Scorcher is a perfect example of why. Amazing preservation, blinding colors make this book one of the most memorable books from my run. Daredevil 23, Don Maggie Thompson collection. Scrambling to buy the Don Maggie Thompson copies that I needed or wanted to upgrade when they were being released was not fun. I did okay, but it was still a struggle. Looking at Heritage, it looks like I bid on 30 and won 5, so which is not a great strike rate. I'm happy with the 5 I got. Stiltman. Let me tell you, these Stiltman covers, I have no affinity for Stiltman, which I'll mention again later, but these Stiltman covers are fun. Spider-Man, you guys love this guy. Yellow covers, I love yellow covers. So, the one I was talking about it, the ones I'm happy with, the Don Maggie Thompson books I got, I was really happy with. And including this one. This red cover was just popped like crazy and has really good quality production. Just a sliver of the white of the back cover is there. Really square. Basically just a perfect book. Daredevil Unmasked. I love this copy of number 30, CGC 9.4. The scan does nothing for the glory of this black cover. The richness of the black on this was just crazy. I was really surprised because you get some fading over the years. This really had none. It was like pure black. It was really such a sharp book. And, Thor. What's Daredevil doing fighting Thor? That's just crazy talk. So it's a fact. Daredevil 32, CGC 9.4, Western pen. So it's a fact. Owning any old holder book is like walking a tightrope. I remember thinking at the time of consigning these books that if I were going to hold on to them, I would have had this copy, cracked and pressed and regraded, because it looks like it had some slab damage in the holder, but I also think the damage would have been sorted out by pressing, as there was no color breaking damage, just the impressions and bends you would see from the book sliding around in the holder. I know there's some chance it still would have been downgraded, but it would have been better to know the true grade of the book and to have the book in a safer holder than to walk around with this thing for a while. Now this Daredevil 34 CGC 9.4 Western pen, this Western pen copy had no such worries, being in a relatively modern holder. The book had really beautiful colors and like wonderful overall presentation. I've mentioned before how beautiful curator copies are in the first video. And here's one example that I've owned. Accurately graded, with perfect preservation, and it had survived the old holder without any damage. That's 3 wins, I think. This Daredevil 37 CGC 9.4 is an outstanding copy. I know I've been talking mostly about my pedigree books, but this book was easily one of my favorite books from the run. I love Doctor Doom, as I've mentioned elsewhere. I love Fantastic Four, so he's one of my favorite villains. And this cover is just killer. It wasn't quite this black. I think the scan is a little richer than maybe the real life book was, but it was close, actually. It was really like deep, rich blacks, perfectly centered, perfect preservation. And really, this is easily one of the best 9.4s of this book. And like the Thor book, it really rich blacks, just unbelievable. So, super fan of this one. Daredevil 41, 9.6, CGC 9.6, White Mountain. White Mountain is my favorite pedigree. I don't know if I've said that explicitly on YouTube before today. If not, it will be a theme here going forward. In fact, the book I most want in the whole world that I could possibly ever own, the book that I want most in the whole world is the Allentown Detective 27, which that's not going to happen. But the book I would own, if I could own one book, is the White Mountain Daredevil #1. I had been poking around looking for that book for many years, more than 20 years, and never even got a sniff as to where it is. I wonder if it's one of those books that kind of disappeared from the hobby, selling at Sotheby's in 92, and it just hasn't been seen since. And Jerry Weiss had no idea who got it either, and he was running those sales for them. So anyway, I was failing getting that, the miracle of finding that book. I was happy to own some of the later issues from the run. They started to come out in the mid 2010s, and I picked them up wherever possible. And I was really happy to own them, including this gorgeous copy. So, classic cover alert. This great Captain America cover. I love it. And one of the things in going through this, putting together this list, and putting together this video, I forgot how many Susha News copies I had until I put this list together. I had 11. I won't even be showing them all. Well, I'll show them all, but I won't be talking about them, since many are later in the run. But that's a pretty high percentage of the total collection to be tied up in one pedigree. There's another pedigree that I had more of. It's not White Mountain. Hey, can you guess what it'll be? Maybe. Daredevil 45, CGC 9.4 Western pen. I love this photo cover. I love the Statue of Liberty. I love this view of kind of grimy 60s New York. And having the Western pen copy of this book was a real treat. Another Western pen copy, Jester cover. This book, so Daredevil 47, CGC 9.4, John G. Fantuccio pedigree. This book contains one of Stan Lee's personal favorites of his own stories, Brother Take My Hand. It's a great story and features incredible Gene Colan art in the interiors. It's truly one of the classics of Silver Age Daredevil. If you've never read it, seek it out. It's been reprinted a lot. It's really a classic. And this copy was a real favorite of mine. 47 is such a great book, so having a sharp pedigree copy was important to me. And when this pedigree started to come out, I like really focused on getting a copy. This copy, in fact, I sold another. I might have sold a 9.6 actually. I may have downgraded from a 9.6 to this pedigree copy. There was one book that I did that with, so I'll have to look back and figure out which one it was. This Daredevil 48 CGC 9.4 leads me to talk about pedigree copies. It's not a pedigree book. I don't know. I like pedigree copies for a few reasons. Pedigree collections, starting with the Edgar Church collection, drove the hobby forward from the 80s until the dawn of the CGC era, and I appreciate their role in making comics what it is today. They taught us about what high grade really means. Before Church, you just had no idea like how well preserved a comic could be. And then after the Church collection came out, you realized that books could be absolutely newsstand perfect, and that was what we strived for. Secondly, while pedigree books aren't the end-all be-all they once were, a Church book would just sell for 5 times guide automatically, they still add a significant allure to graded books and add some percentage even to the highest graded copies. Third, the history of some of the collections is truly fascinating. And in fact, the lore surrounding the Edgar Church collection and Chuck and his stories and Mile High and the whole deal and all of the books that sold and the people that have owned hundreds of them. And it's just, it keeps us busy, let's say, as comic historians and comic collectors. Fourth, they serve as a shorthand. So pedigree serves as a shorthand to understanding the general quality of a book. If you see the Edgar Church Mile High notation on a book, you can assume that it's got great preservation because most of them still do, even, all these decades after the books came out of Edgar Church's basement. And if you've handled raw Church copies, you actually know how they smell because they've got that cedar scent that you can tell automatically. So seeing that, you get to like, well, it's going to have great preservation. If I crack it out, it's going to have a little bit of a cedar smell. So all of that preamble is, it leads to this. This comment. While pedigree notation might be shorthand to understand the quality of a book, there are plenty of books that are as good or better than the best pedigree copies. This is one such copy. To say it's newsstand fresh is an understatement. It looks like it never made out of the printer's building and went straight into climate-controlled storage. It was just absolutely perfect, and the scan actually does a good job of capturing it. The rich brown, red, and yellow of this cover is insane. And again, I keep mentioning it, Stiltman. Great design on these Stiltman covers. Now, this is the flip side of that coin. So, curator copies are in fact ridiculously nice, and seeking curator copies is a really good idea if you like fresh comics. You see curator pedigree, you can assume it's one of the best preserved copies because curator in the title meant that they had early access to climate controlled storage and were storing their books in perfect environments. Another Western pen. Here's Daredevil illustrating walking the tightrope of having a beautiful pedigree book in an old school holder. This copy was super sharp and well graded for a 9.4. But having the old labels around, makes me want to not even breathe on these books for fear of shifting the books around in the case and damaging them beyond repair. That was rare. You could generally press out the issues caused by the holder, but I remember an example of a book that actually had tears along the edge because it was so violently rammed into the edge of the holder during shipment. And I just realized some of you may not completely up to speed on the old school CGC case lore. In short, the earlier cases were designed in such a way that the books could shift in the holder, and books were damaged in transit or in other handling. They since have created a holder that keeps the book kind of in stasis, so it can't shift around and smash into the edge of the holder. Daredevil 58 CGC 9.4 Northland. I would have to research it, but there's a non-zero chance this is the only Northland copy I've ever owned. It's the only one from this collection for sure. And after rambling about pedigrees on YouTube today, I'm thinking of doing a comic book pedigree tier list. And, I'm starting now. So Northland is what, D tier? Maybe C tier, just based on the Hulk #1 CGC 9.2, which is tied for the second best copy of that mega key. Other than that, the best book is like what? Avengers 1, Avengers 4? We'll see where they end up, but I'm thinking it's a C tier. Another Fantuccio copy. John G. Fantuccio, Daredevil 60, CGC 9.4. The red cover on this book, perfect preservation. It was a stunner. Daredevil 61, CGC 9.6, Twin Cities. So now that I've got this tier list idea in my head, and as I work through a run of, mini run of pedigree books, 60, 61, and 62 are all pedigrees, I'm reminded that in researching which key books were in what Silver Age pedigrees, Twin Cities surprised me as a pedigree that has an incredible number of Silver Age keys present. They're not as, all as nice as this near perfect Daredevil, but there are so many keys in that collection. That list isn't complete and is slightly out of date, but Twin Cities has a very high percentage of keys that I'm tracking. So as I update that, I'll be talking about it here, and you can see there's 25 keys from the Silver Age in the Twin Cities pedigree, which is abnormal. Most of them don't have that many. So, and if we're talking about tier lists, spoilers, Pacific Coast is S tier. Every book I've owned from this pedigree is excellent, including that Fantastic 497 that went missing. Super sharp copy. Zooming in, and it's got the Pacific Coast sticker on it. That's how old school it is. Zooming in, so this had survived the old holder, and zooming in, the only issue I can see is the smallest fray in the lower right-hand corner. Otherwise, it's just a beautiful copy, and at arm's length, it looks like a higher grade book. Absolutely perfect. As I mentioned earlier, this Daredevil number 67 CGC 9.6 Don Maggie Thompson pedigree copy has a Stiltman cover. And, he's a really good cover subject. Look through the run. I've already shown a few. There are a bunch of fun covers featuring the character. And like I said, I have no particular affinity for him as a character, but he's great from a graphic design perspective. Daredevil 69 CGC 9.6 White Mountain. This turned into a minor key with a Black Panther cover appearance, and it's a White Mountain copy, so gotta love that. Another Western pen. So here's one where I couldn't decide which one to keep. I had a 9.6 and a 9.2 Western pen. I kept both. I actually had, which is funny because I wasn't going for points, I had the Western pen in my CGC registry collection, which is crazy talk, but that's what I did. Here we go, Daredevil 73 CGC 9.6 Bowling Green. So Iron Man, Nick Fury, a super dynamic cover. I think this is the only Bowling Green copy I've ever owned. If I'm going to include Bowling Green in the tier list, there are 61 recognized CGC pedigrees, so I have to decide whether or not I'm going to do them all. But if I'm going to include Bowling Green, I'm going to have to get an opinion on the pedigree, as I don't have much of one right now. I didn't even track it in the Silver Age Keys list because, when I discussed it on the CGC forum, I was like, which pedigree should I look at? And I came up with a sub-list, and then I went from there. So here's one. So I never had an affinity for this cover. Daredevil 77, CGC 9.6, Don and Maggie Thompson copy. I never really liked it until I got this crazy, gorgeous copy. This cover has great, rich colors, and there's the gradients in the background, and then the massive Daredevil figure dominating the proceedings, and then there's the slightly surreal giant newspaper in the background. The design is great, and Mary Severn. The design is great, and the execution is amazing. I'm a real fan of this book. Fun times. This book, Daredevil 81 CGC 9.4, is the complete opposite of 75. I have always loved this book. It's the start of the Black Widow crossover with Daredevil that lasted for years. And I love the cover. I was one of the happiest people around when Black Widow got pushed to the top of the Marvel Universe pecking order as part of the MCU Avengers. She's just an outrageously great character. It started here and with her 1980s Avengers affiliation, so her Daredevil run and the Avengers. And really, her Daredevil partnership is my favorite pre-Miller run on the character. Daredevil 83, CGC 9.6, Twin Cities. Sharp copy. I have a thing for yellow covers. I blame my love for Superman #1, which is my second favorite Golden Age book. Daredevil 84 CGC 9.6 mass copy. This might be the worst copy I had in terms of quality of production in my run. There's another I won't show that might be worse, but this is an interesting pedigree copy, so why not? But the diagonal alignment of the cover and the white of the back showing on the front isn't that great, although it's not nearly as bad as some of the other books from this period. QP, quality of production, is one of the things that I focused on with this collection. Really nice quality of production. It's what I wanted. I think I did well overall. I teased it earlier. Toughest book in the run? Money aside, because it takes a lot of money to get a #1. Money aside, it was Daredevil 86. I never got a 9.4, and for a while I was basically buying every raw copy I could find, hoping that an eBay near mint was an actual near mint book. I think I bought a dozen copies over a few years and never got better than a 9.2. Adding insult to injury, after I decided to sell my collection, a 9.6 sold for $115 somewhere. It's in GPA, I don't know where. But right around the time I was selling, which is crazy. When I bid on a 9.6 in 2017, it was nearly a $1,000 book, and I got blown away at like $875 or something like that. Little Rocky Mountain 9.8. This white-covered book from the Rocky Mountain pedigree, Daredevil 90, it's basically perfect. Would I be crazy enough to resubmit a 9.8 just in case it came back 9.9? No. But this book was tempting. I still see nothing wrong with it after reviewing the scans for this video. Like, zooming in, you just can't find anything wrong with it. Such a gorgeous book. Is this my first mention of Gil Kane on the channel? It's not going to be the last. Daredevil 91, CGC 9.4, White Mountain pedigree. Having a want list for original art is like an insane thing to do since there's only one of everything, and you kind of get driven crazy. But if I were to have a want list, this cover would be on it. It's a great image, and I've never owned a piece of Gil Kane art, so maybe this would be where I'll start. Daredevil 103, CGC 9.4, White Mountain. Spider-Man, Black Widow, Daredevil. Great book from the White Mountain pedigree. First appearance of Ramrod, so is there going to be like a Ramrod movie? We might get there with the way that they've spent the last few years mining the MCU. Susha News, a lot of those. Daredevil 105, Origin of Moondragon. This and 107 I'll talk about at the same time. So 105, and again, not great QP, although this one is centered at least, but look at all the white that shows from the back cover. It's kind of messy looking. So Origin of Moondragon, and then 107, Susha News, again, owned a lot of them. I collected Daredevil as my primary focus for years, but I also love Fantastic Four, which I've mentioned, and because of Fantastic Four, the Marvel cosmic characters. So this book and 105 are like two of my favorites from the run. This 107 has got everything. It's a high-grade pedigree copy. Captain Marvel and Moondragon make appearances, and it's got a Jim Starlin cover. Again, this is one of those ones that, like, if I had a comic art want list, I would have this on it. No one's that crazy. Well, there are people that are that crazy, but they don't publicize it. But no one cares about me, so I wish I had this cover. Daredevil 131, CGC 9.4. Story time. I sold a copy of Daredevil 131 CGC 9.2 for $400 in September of 2002. My price guides are in storage, so I can't check the guide value at the time, but I'm thinking it was like 10x or 20x near mint guide. That first Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, for whatever reason, had some hype attached to it, and I was the first out the door with the higher grade copy at the time. That price was tied a couple of months later in 2002 with another $400 sale, according to GPA at least. And then that number wasn't matched until January 23, 2021, when a 9.2 sold for $460. I talked in the first video on the channel about how sometimes you have to wait to recoup your losses I mean, your cost for a hype-fueled purchase. 19 years is a pretty extreme example of that. Daredevil 132 CGC 9.6 Western Pen. Answer to the mystery I posed earlier? I had 17 Western Pen copies in my collection. It was the most copies of any pedigree in the run. This might have been my favorite copy out of all of them, since Bullseye was such a core character in the Miller run. I started collecting Daredevil because of Miller's run. The combination of Daredevil, Elektra, Kingpin, and Bullseye, mixed with Daredevil's vision about Hell's Kitchen and New York and what comics could be, was intoxicating to me when I was a kid. That never changed. Even after selling all of these books, I still love the character and just reread the Miller Daredevil run a couple of years ago. It's as fun now as it was then. And with that, I'm done with this trip down memory lane. It was a lot of fun to put together, so I hope you enjoyed it. It wasn't as much fun as putting the actual run together. That was a blast. But thinking back through the process and taking a look at some of the great books I had has definitely been fun. Next week, I'll be looking back at results from the September 2024 Heritage Signature Auction. I hope to see you then. Thanks.